Coming up on Arirang News, South Korea's vaccination campaign is speeding up. By the end of this week, around 20% of the population are expected to have gotten their first doses. In trade, South Korea has posted its 12th current account surplus in a row. That's a full year since the drop in exports early in the pandemic. And reports say the Federal Reserve is going to start discussions as soon as next week about a cutback in its asset purchases, so-called tapering, which would have ripple effects across the global economy. It's 5:00 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. South Korea is ramping up its vaccine campaign and is on course to have given first doses to 20% of the population by the end of the week. The longer-term goal is to have inoculated 36 million people, about 70% of the population, by September. Jang Tae-hyun reports.
South Korea is picking up the pace of its COVID-19 inoculations, with more vaccines to arrive in the country on Wednesday.
650,000 doses of the Pfizer vaccine, signed directly with the company, will arrive at Incheon International Airport on June 9th. So of the 7 million Pfizer doses scheduled to arrive in the first half of the year, 5,050,000 would have arrived, and the rest will come soon.
This is part of a total of 66 million Pfizer doses that the country is buying directly from the company. The Pfizer vaccine is being given to over 75s and will be used for medical staff, police officers, firefighters, and first and second grade elementary teachers who are under the age of 30. The country recorded its highest number of daily inoculations on Monday, vaccinating over 850,000 people. Interior and Safety Minister Chon Hae-chul said Tuesday that South Korea is close to reaching its vaccination goals.
Considering the speed of inoculations, the first shot for more than 10 million people, which is 20% of the population, will be completed this week. We're expecting that to be 13 million by mid-June and 14 million by the end of the month.
Vaccinated people will get a badge to signify that they've had their jabs. And for those over the age of 65, an inoculation sticker will be posted to their personal ID by the end of June. Currently, people can get a certificate of inoculation on paper or through a mobile application. As of Tuesday, 8.45 million people in South Korea have received their first dose of a COVID-19 vaccine, which is 16.5% of the population. Jang Tae-hyun, Arirang News.
This Friday, the South Korean government will announce whether it's extending the current social distancing rules as they are through the end of June or changing them. Right now, the greater Seoul area is under distancing level 2, while most of the rest of the country is under level 1.5. And from July, the government also plans to change the current 5-tier distancing system to a 4-tier scheme and possibly ease some business restrictions. This new system will be unveiled next week. The country reported 454 new COVID-19 cases on Tuesday. There were also 175 cases of the major variants reported over the last week, and those raised the total number of variant cases to date to more than 1,700. India is expanding its vaccination program. Before, vaccines were free only for people older than 45 and for frontline medical workers. Now they'll be free for all adults. Thailand, too, has started vaccinations and aims to vaccinate 70% of its population by the end of the year. Kim Hyo-sun has more.
With India witnessing a steady decline in new COVID-19 cases in recent weeks, its federal government says free vaccines will be provided to everyone above the age of 18.
So far, millions of people have got free vaccines, and from now on, people above the age of 18 will be added. For older citizens, the Indian government will be providing free vaccines.
In a nationally televised speech Monday, Prime Minister Narendra Modi said free vaccinations will start on June 21st. The announcement comes amid mounting pressure on its government to boost vaccination speed and equity. It is also a major shift in policy that focused only on giving free shots to people over 45 years of age and frontline workers. The country has administered over 220 million vaccinations, with less than 5% of its population fully inoculated. In other parts of Asia, Thailand on Monday started its massive vaccination drive as the country has been grappling with its third and worst wave yet. Aiming to distribute some 6 million doses by the end of June, the Thai Prime Minister stressed that his government will make sure everyone can be vaccinated.
We have adjusted the vaccine allocation so we can distribute them to all provinces. The amount is varied according to the infection rate in each area. This is to help further prevent the spread of the disease.
The Thai government has set up massive vaccination centers at stadiums and shopping malls across the country and plans to vaccinate 70% of the total population by the end of the year. In Europe, Spain jump-started its summer tourism season on Monday by welcoming vaccinated foreign tourists. In an effort to boost the country's flagging tourism industry, Spain says all visitors who've received vaccines approved by the WHO at least 14 days prior to arriving will be allowed in. However, non-essential incoming arrivals from Brazil, India, and South Africa, where variants have been a concern, remain barred from entry. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
And now turning to the economy, South Korea in April posted a current account surplus for the 12th straight month. The current account is the broadest measure of trade. The Bank of Korea says the surplus came to $1.9 billion. That's compared to a $3.3 billion deficit a year earlier in the initial days of the pandemic. Exports came to around $52 billion, with car shipments in particular up 75% and semiconductors 29%. The surplus was smaller than the month before, though, because April is when dividends are paid to foreign investors. And investors are watching to see when the Federal Reserve will start winding down its asset purchases, which have helped the American economy through the pandemic. Reports say it might start discussions about so-called tapering next week. So Young reports.
The U.S. appears to be looking to tighten its monetary easing policy amid concerns of rising inflation. The Federal Reserve is reportedly to put the issue of tapering on the discussion table as early as the coming Federal Open Market Committee meeting next week. Tapering is the slowing of asset purchases, including bonds and mortgage-backed securities, and therefore reversal of a quantitative easing policy. CNBC reported on Monday that the Fed is likely to begin reducing asset purchases later this year or early next year, citing comments from Fed officials. Since March last year, the central bank has been purchasing $120 billion of assets a month in order to stimulate the economy, but tapering would mean it would cut back on these purchases. Any decision will mainly depend on inflationary pressure and how fast the job market recovers from the pandemic. The Fed has committed to only begin scaling back its asset purchases after there is substantial further progress on employment. U.S. job market picked up in May. The employment rate dropped to 5.8% from 13.3% in May last year. And the Wall Street Journal reported on Monday that a surge in commodity prices could arouse fears over persistent inflation. It said that corn, soybeans, and wheat have jumped to their highest levels in 8 years. Oil recently reached a 2-year high. With the inflationary pressure growing, the Fed might announce the tapering faster than the market expects. And experts say that the Fed decision might lead South Korea's central bank to raise its key interest rate.
It is difficult for Korea to raise its interest rates based on its current economic status. However, if the U.S. begins tapering and Korea sees fewer COVID-19 cases and faces inflationary pressure, the country has a higher chance of readjusting its interest rates.
He added that for now, the Bank of Korea seems highly likely to wait for the fast decision before making its move. 서은경, Arirang News.
The head of the International Labor Organization, Guy Ryder, says the pandemic's impact on jobs has been much worse than that of the 2008 global financial crisis. Speaking at the opening of the ILO's ministerial conference on Monday, the ILO chief described the pandemic's impact as cataclysmic and 4 times worse than 2008. The ILO said last week that job losses linked to the pandemic likely won't be made up for until at least 2023. Time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Mr. Daniel Yu, Global Strategist at Yuanta Securities. Mr. Yu, good to have you back on. Thanks for making time today.
Good afternoon.
Well, let's start with this decision by the countries of the G7 to support a minimum rate for corporate taxes around the world to stop companies from headquartering in ultra-low tax countries to avoid taxes. The rate would be at least 15%, and Korea actually has a rate higher than that. So how do you see this proposal affecting Korea and/or Korean companies?
Yes, as you said, the corporation around the world should pay at least 15% tax on their earnings. The Treasury Department have said that on Thursday as a part of its push for global minimum for the businesses. The final rate could even go higher than that, according to the Treasury's release. That it said that 15% is a minimum as a floor, and that discussion should continue to be ambitious and push that rate higher. Now, if you look at the U.S. companies, currently they're paying about 21% rate, a rate that was slashed during the Trump administration. And before that, it was as high as 35%. Now, under the proposal by the President Joe Biden, he had initially said that they wanted to push that up to 28% from 21%. But now they have let go of that, and now they're talking about this minimum rate for global international rate. Now, if you look at some of these high growth stocks, including Google's and Facebook and et cetera, these international companies, if you look at the tax rate, it comes in much below than 15% minimum rate. So obviously this would have a negative implication for some of the major international companies who are paying much less tax rates. As far as the Korean companies are concerned, the impact would be probably fairly minimal because tax rate is 15% lower than what the corporate tax rate the Korean company is paying already. And maybe this kind of impact is going to be very different for individual companies per se. However, though, if we calculate the NASDAQ 100 companies overall tax rate, it comes out to be about 12% for the last year. So it's only implication of about 3 percentage points higher if this law passes. So therefore, the overall implication will be much less than original proposal by Joe Biden, where they want to push the tax rate from 21% to 28%. So it will be different for individual companies in the future.
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see if that gets through Congress. Reports saying that Republicans might make that difficult. Now, turning to the markets, stocks overnight on Wall Street were lower on the Dow, the S&P, but a gain of about 0.5% on the NASDAQ. What's the story in the global markets?
Yes, if you look at the overall interest rate environment and what the Yellen, the head of the finance department, talking about, and also versus the Powell, Fed chairman. The Fed chairman and most of the Fed governors are talking about the tapering is going to be coming at a much later pace than what Yellen is saying. The reason for that is because of the labor side is not fully recovered, and the overall inflationary pressure that we are seeing so far is just a short-term implication rather than a long-term based. Overall job adding is still much below than what had been since the COVID-19. Still about 8 million jobs been lost since the COVID-19, even though the recovery is coming. And the pace of the recovery is still very slow, which means that the income growth rate is not going to be that significant to push the inflation to the long-term increases. We are seeing as high as 3% interest, the inflation numbers, but most likely it's going to go down to probably 2% because if you look at the salary growth rate for U.S., it's coming in at only about 2% year on year in a longer term basis. So I think there's a question mark in terms of when the tapering is going to come, when the interest rate is going to be raised. What the Fed and the central banks are talking about is that it's going to be slow pace, whereas the finance departments are talking about maybe the pace should be a little bit faster. all in all, we have to wait and see. In any case, the inflation is coming and the interest rate environment is going to be a little bit higher than before. And therefore, we need to look at the equity market on the basis of what is going to be a long-term interest rate environment. However, though, if you look at the overall earnings growth rate and the return on equity, U.S. companies are showing the highest number, operating profit margins at 13.1%, which is record highest in history. So all in all, equity looks still quite interesting, positive.
Well, Korean stocks today were a mix, almost flat really, coming off of an all-time high yesterday on the Kospi. Looks like maybe some profit taking by individual investors. Tell us about the domestic market.
Yes, the Korean market seems to be kind of taking some posture that it might take a little bit more time for the market to go up because you have on Thursday the triple witching day. The futures and options are going to be closing. And before that, obviously, the market's going to be fairly volatile. Main reason for that is because still people are talking about tapering issues. And if the tapering happens, then the interest rate hike by the Bank of Korea might happen faster than expected. However, though, I don't expect the tapering to come in until next year. And interest rate hike is not going to come in until year 2023. If that's the case, the rate hike by the Bank of Korea is not going to happen anytime soon. If it happens, maybe as early as probably end of this year. All in all, so far, people are concerned because of that talk of tapering and interest rate hike in the longer term. However, though, earnings growth rate are very strong and the economic recovery is very strong for Korea. And we have not seen this kind of earnings growth in the past. So therefore, if the second quarter results comes through by sometime in July, we think that market can go up even higher from the current rate. However, though, in the short term, with this short-term maturing date of the futures and options and the short-term talk about these interest rate hike or tapering, it is resulting into some of the volatility in the market in the short term. Once again, in a longer-term basis, we think that the earnings growth is much stronger than the concern that we're talking about.
Well, before we go, Korea's current account, let's talk trade. This is the broadest measure of trade. Posted a surplus in April. That's 12 months in a row now we've had a surplus. Interestingly, it's also the first April surplus in 3 years. What's happening there with trade?
Yes, South Korea's current account swung to 1.91 billion surplus in May in 2021. From 3.3 billion deficit in the same month or year earlier. Clearly, this is a very positive news. The goods account surpluses widened sharply to US dollar of 4.56 billion from 0.7 billion a year ago, while the service account posted about 0.01 billion surpluses compared to 1.5 billion deficit a year ago. Clearly, this is all coming in as Korea is very sensitive to global economic growth rate. And Korea is very dependent on exports, and global economy is recovering very fast, as we've seen. If that's the case, Korea will continue to show very strong number in the current account, as well as trade surpluses. If that's the case, then Korean companies are making more money, and therefore the equity environment is going to be positive based on higher earnings. So we need to watch this kind of closely. We think that the numbers are going to be even wider as the global economy recovers at the current pace.
Got it. All right, Mr. Yu, we'll have to leave it there for today. Thank you, as always, for sharing your insights with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
President Moon Jae-in says that his participation in the G7 summit in the UK this coming weekend will be a chance to upgrade South Korea's diplomacy. Chairing a cabinet meeting on Tuesday, Moon said that South Korea's invitation to the G7 shows how not only the country's economy, but also its soft power is getting high marks. He said he will focus on emphasizing the country's role as a global vaccine hub and as a bridge between developing and developed countries in tackling climate change. The G7 summit takes place from this Friday to Sunday. The president also asked his cabinet to use tax revenue to fund a supplementary budget plan to help reduce inequality and boost employment. The United States says it'll work as hard as it can to arrange reunions of Korean Americans with their long-lost family members in North Korea and to have them take place as soon as possible. Kim Da-mi has more.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has pledged full efforts to help realize the long-awaited reunions of Korean Americans with their loved ones in North Korea. Blinken showed such support in a hearing on Monday when asked for efforts on the matter by U.S. Congresswoman Grace Meng, who proposed the Divided Families Reunification Act in February. Calling the issue heart-wrenching, Blinken said Washington will work with Seoul to make sure that the interests of Korean Americans who have been separated from their families are reflected in the U.S. efforts. Currently, as many as 100,000 Americans of Korean descent are believed to have family members living in the North. The two Koreas have held some 20 family reunions between their separated families, but no reunions for those in the U.S. have taken place. The U.S. State Department last week also showed support for Seoul's recent decision to build more video reunion centers for families separated by the Korean War.
We believe the expansion of the number of video reunion centers is necessary so that we can use them immediately when inter-Korean relations improve.
For its plan to establish 7 more of those centers nationwide, Seoul's Unification Ministry will spend over $1 million. Kim Da-mi, Arirang News.
The UN's nuclear watchdog says there are signs in North Korea indicating that the regime might be producing plutonium. The head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi, said Monday that steam has been spotted at a plant in Pyongyang that serves as a reprocessing lab, although the steam's origin is impossible to confirm. He added that some North Korean nuclear facilities have been operating since September, while others remain shut. He also reiterated his call on North Korea to fully comply with its obligations under UN Security Council resolutions. The new single, Butter, from K-pop stars BTS is #1 on Billboard's main singles chart for a second week in a row. That's a rare distinction, and it's thanks in part to 2 new remixes of the song. Lee Sung-jae reports.
As soon as it was released, BTS's single, Butter, topped the Billboard Hot 100 chart with an overwhelming amount of Americans tuning in. And for the second straight week, the song has topped the chart, becoming one of just a few songs to have achieved the feat. Since the Billboard Hot 100 chart was created in 1958, there have been only 58 singles that have debuted at #1. Of those, only 23, including Butter, managed to hold on to the top spot going into the next week. With their latest accomplishment, there's little doubt Butter has become the hottest song of the summer. The single also boasts immense download volume, twice as many as the #2 song in just the second week. And it's thanks to 2 remixed versions that have been released. Now critics are saying BTS have likely cemented their popularity in the US.
The fact the band's airplay and streaming figures hold up so well throughout the week shows many Americans are listening to BTS as they go about their daily lives.
With Butter already on pace to better BTS's first all-English single, Dynamite, the band may have another goal in mind.
I hope Butter can be loved as the representative song of 2021.
And just as the lyrics say, BTS fans agree the song is most certainly hot like summer. Lee Sung-jae, Arirang News.
Former South Korean footballer Yoo Sang-chul, a star of the 2002 World Cup, died on Monday at the age of 49. Most famous for his goal against Poland, which sealed South Korea's first ever win in a World Cup match. The midfielder starred in the country's run to the semifinals. Yoo enjoyed a 12-year club career in South Korea and Japan, playing 124 matches and scoring 18 goals. After retiring in 2006, Yoo coached 3 K-League clubs. Yoo was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer in late 2019. And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.